Living by Design with host Kathy Holloway Hill. Kathy is a strong, powerful voice. She entertains, informs, and inspires her audiences everywhere she goes.
Kathy Holloway Hill, and welcome to this very critical episode of the Living by Design show. We have some information and just kind of want to share our thoughts with you with all the challenges that we've had to face in this year of 2020 thus far. It's been a challenging year to say the least. We've had to deal with so many things that just one of these challenges in a year could just really push you to the brink of despair and distress. We've had to deal with the pandemic. We've had to deal with social unrest and protests and violence and corrupt cops and killing unarmed Black men. And we've had to deal with climate issues like floods and hurricanes and wildfires and so many things. In this special segment, I want to give you hope. And I also want to get a very critical message across, and that's the message that we are not powerless and we don't have to fear anything because we have a lot of power within our own selves. And I really want to get this message across. And the only way to get this message across is to kind of do a little recap thus far of 2020. So that you can understand how critical it is that your voice be heard. That's your power, your voice, your vote. So what I'd like to do is focus on the three most challenging things that we've had to deal with this year. And that's the pandemic, social unrest, and the economy, unemployment. So let's just take the first challenge. Let's just go with COVID first. And I want to just run back through the beginning, how it started and how did we get where we are currently with over 7 million cases and over 210,000 deaths. Let's take a look.
Today, Washington State and Snohomish Health District officials announced the first U.S. case of a 2019 novel coronavirus.
The patient is currently in isolation.
The second confirmed case of coronavirus in the U.S. right here in the Windy City.
A government plane is planning to evacuate Americans from Wuhan.
The White House announcing that it has created a coronavirus task force.
President Trump is set to ban foreign nationals who pose a transmission risk from entering the country.
Goes through air, Bob. That's always tougher than the touch. You know, the touch, you don't have to touch things, right? But the air, you just breathe the air. That's how it's passed. And so that's a very tricky one. That's a very delicate one. It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus. This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%, so this is deadly stuff. Well, I think, Bob, really, to be honest with you.
Sure, I want you to
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want to create a panic.
Looks like by April, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. I hope that's true.
The number of infections on the Diamond Princess cruise ship has doubled.
The 15 within a couple of days is going to be down to close to zero.
Health officials in Washington state confirm a patient has died from the infection.
Here's what we know about New York City patient.
It wasn't a question of if, but when.
The U.S. does not have enough coronavirus test kits.
It's a virus like the flu.
COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
We will be suspending all travel from Europe.
Customers have been snapping up everything in sight.
My administration is recommending that all Americans avoid gathering in groups of more than 10 people.
Direct all individuals to shelter at their place of residence.
Long lines and hours of delays as travelers returning from Europe had to undergo screenings for the coronavirus.
Stocks going down, gold is going down, credit's going down. Everybody's in complete liquidation mode.
Do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target that?
No. I think they probably would agree with it.
People right here in the Valley say they are getting backlash just for being Asian Americans.
A drug called chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine, and it's shown very, very encouraging early results.
An Arizona man has died after he took chloroquine phosphate because he believed that it would protect him from the coronavirus.
The CDC is advising cloth face covering. It's voluntary. You don't have to do it. I don't think I'm going to be doing it.
Millions more Americans have filed unemployment claims.
The chronic burden of medical ills is likely to make people of color, especially, less resilient to the ravages of COVID-19.
A phased and deliberate approach to reopening.
Georgia's governor reopening his entire state.
On Monday, Arkansas, Colorado, Montana, and Mississippi will also begin lifting restrictions.
Tensions mounting in Michigan, hours after protesters stormed the state capitol, demanding an end to the stay-at-home order.
In Huntington Beach, hundreds of protesters swarming the coast.
Several thousand workers have gotten sick.
On the Mississippi coast today, casinos reopening.
Folks coast to coast are risking COVID exposure, seeking sun and fun this Memorial Day weekend.
More than 100,000 American lives lost to the coronavirus.
We will be today terminating our relationship with the World Health Organization.
In Arizona, COVID cases spiking by 34% over the past week.
My worst nightmare.
The U.S. Food and Drug Administration withdrew emergency approval for hospitals to use hydroxychloroquine to treat COVID-19.
I said to my people, slow the testing down, please.
Bars in Texas once again shut down, now a second time, as we have seen a spike in certain areas.
They had just been reopened only 3 weeks.
The U.S. is the green line, which plateaued and is now rising sharply.
President Trump tonight is escalating his push for schools to reopen.
The top health official in Tulsa who says President Trump's rally last month likely contributed to a spike in COVID cases.
Major League Baseball is returning this week.
Over 2/3 of Miami Marlins players have tested positive, forcing the league to postpone 14 games and adjust the schedules of 6 teams.
Another COVID scare in Washington after a Republican congressman tested positive before he was supposed to travel to Texas with the president.
After House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tonight announcing a mask mandate on the House floor after Gohmert tested positive.
And when asked about the rising death toll in early August.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is.
After a house party near Beverly Hills, the mayor of Los Angeles is now threatening to cut off power and water to anyone who hosts a large gathering.
Hundreds of thousands of bikers have arrived in the city of Sturgis. It's stirring anxiety among some who fear the rally could trigger a COVID-19 outbreak in the state.
The death toll in the U.S. tops 200,000, the highest in the world.
Worldwide coronavirus deaths have passed the 1 million mark, with 20% of those in the United States.
Don't let it dominate you. Don't be afraid of it. You're going to beat it. We have the best medical equipment. We have the best medicines, all developed recently. And you're going to beat it. I didn't feel so good. And 2 days ago, I could have left 2 days ago. 2 days ago, I felt great, like better than I have in a long time. I said just recently, better than 20 years ago. Don't let it dominate. Don't let it take over your lives.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Hi, welcome back, and thank you so much for tuning in to this very critical episode of the Living by Design show. And we are recapping some of the most challenging obstacles that we've had to deal with thus far in 2020. The next big challenge that I want to focus on is the social unrest, the systemic racism, and all of the horrible police killings and protests and violence and all of the mind-blowing issues that we've had to deal with, which actually have been around for a long time. But it's like the year 2020, it's like everything just really went backwards, to say the least. So let's take a look at some of the really pivotal, unprecedented moments in this year of 2020 that we have had to deal with in the area of social unrest, protest, violence.
The scenes are shocking, but too familiar to so many people.
The police don't care about us. They knew exactly what they were doing in Minneapolis. And at the end of the day, we had to fight for what's right for us.
There's a long list of names and places that stain our history of race relations. Rodney King in Los Angeles, Trayvon Martin in Florida, Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Now, the protests that followed every one of those incidents and now George Floyd's death are a manifestation of built-up anger in those communities, according to Floyd's family lawyer.
He's just the latest tipping point in a string of killings of unarmed black people at the hands, or should I say, in his case, the knee of the police.
On May 25th, 2020, George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, died after a white police officer, holding his knee on Floyd's neck, pinned him to the pavement while he was in handcuffs. In the days that followed, public outrage grew over what some protesters and lawmakers said is another case of police brutality against a black man.
Please, I can't breathe. Please, man.
Responsive right now, bro. Does he have a pulse? No, bro, look at him. He's not responsive right now, bro.
I'm tired of it, man. I understand, black man. I understand.
This exchange between 3 generations of black men in Charlotte, North Carolina Saturday night is an example of the ongoing struggle in communities across North America. A 46-year-old man argues with 31-year-old Curtis Hayes Jr. Then Hayes brought a 16-year-old protester into the discussion, not to fan the flames of anger, but rather to find a different path forward so the teen wouldn't feel the same frustration in another 10 years.
Putting yourself in harm's way is not the way. No, it's not. You and the other your counterparts the same age and that have that same power. Y'all coming with a better way. Because we ain't doing it. That's 3 generations right there that is on that bridge fighting for the same thing that my ancestors fought for. And those 3 generations sat there 100 years ago in the same aspect, in the same chaos, in the same America.
I'm tired of my black men and my black women being shot, being killed by the NYPD. I'm tired of it. I have 3 black men in my home. I'm tired. I am tired.
What do we want? Justice. What do we want now?
2 weeks after the killing of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer, demonstrations against police brutality and racism continue in cities across the US. People of all races have stood in solidarity under the slogan Black Lives Matter. Most rallies have been peaceful, but clashes have taken place between security forces and demonstrators, resulting in more than 10,000 arrests. And many of the protesters view President Trump's threat to deploy the military as divisive.
Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
The president has been criticized for using the police to clear protesters near the White House so that he could be photographed in front of the so-called Church of the Presidents, which had been set on fire the night before. In dispersing the crowd, the police and National Guard used tear gas, stun grenades, and rubber bullets, and even attacked a cameraman who was broadcasting live from the scene.
Small number of people in the scheme of things protesting to begin with.
very few of whom committed acts of violence, but that few was systematic in their efforts to harm police officers and to create damage to police vehicles, to storefronts, to other property. And again, that's not going to get us anywhere. But now it is time for people to go home.
The Justice and Policing Act establishes a bold, transformative vision of policing in America. Never again should the world be subjected to witnessing what we saw on the streets in Minneapolis, the slow murder of an individual by a uniformed police officer.
If people ain't understanding, we getting killed, like we don't have the same type of life that other people have. So just to see everybody coming together and just understanding that and nothing else, it's like, you feel supported, especially as a black man, us being black. We out here, we feel like our community, like our people around us is really supporting us right now, and it's good.
And that support has spread wide and far, with Black Lives Matter demonstrations taking place around the world. They've often gone ahead despite government warnings not to attend protests because of the coronavirus risk, which shows just how important this cause is to so many. George Floyd said as a child that he wanted to change the world. Could it be that his death will prove a turning point, after which the world finally says enough is enough to racism and police brutality?
To George's family and friends, Jill and I know the deep hole in your hearts when you bury a piece of your soul deep in this earth. As I've said to you privately, we know you will never feel the same again. For most people, the numbness you feel now will slowly turn day after day, season after season into purpose through the memory of the one they lost. Like so many others, I've watched with awe as you summon the absolute courage to channel God's grace and show the good man George was. To stir justice too long dormant, to move millions to act peacefully and purposefully. We can heal this nation's wounds and remember its pain, not callous the heart and forget. May God be with you, George Floyd, and your family. In the words of a hymn from my church based on the 91st Psalm, may he raise you up on eagle's wings, bear you on the breath of dawn, and make you to shine like the sun, and hold you in the palm of his hand. God bless you all.
Hi, I hope you are really getting a lot of great information and just seeing everything that we have had to tolerate and deal with thus far this year in 2020. I want to now take a look back thus far, because we're still in the year, so it's not over yet, but thus far, how many people have lost jobs? They've lost homes. They've lost hope. A lot of people have had to endure not knowing how they're going to feed their children or feed themselves. A lot of people have found themselves homeless because of the unemployment rate has been at an all-time high. I mean, this recession has been one of the worst recessions in modern history. And all of these things are related. All of these things are related that we've been talking about thus far on the show. But with the recession, the unemployment, the ability to just go out and have the opportunity to buy food, it's difficult. And I want to just take a quick look back at some of those moments.
This is an extraordinary disruption. It's almost like a meteor hit the entire planet, and we have to now deal with the fact that we've been knocked off our axis.
We are going into a global recession.
We're in an economic downturn.
The world is now in recession.
Recession in the next quarter or two, because everything is shutting down, of course.
Many economists agree the U.S. has already entered a recession. The first place we can see recession signals is in the jobs market. Industries like retail, restaurants, air travel, and hotels have laid off thousands of workers as business has stopped. Nearly 10 million Americans filed for unemployment insurance claims during the final 2 weeks in March, the highest level on record, after they were let go from their jobs as their employers dealt with the impacts of the virus. Some economists predict the unemployment rate could spike from 3.5% in February to 15% by the middle of the year.
3 days, scores of unemployed workers in Kentucky have been lining up.
Do not lose your ticket.
Desperate for help.
I got through to nobody since I filed in April the 19th.
Out of work and out of patience, Kentucky residents poured into the Capitol for their first chance to get an in-person meeting at a pop-up unemployment office since the pandemic began. Brianna Glass applied 3 months ago and is still having trouble getting payments. She stood in line yesterday, just days after giving birth.
I mean, I've called, I've emailed, I did everything I possibly could, and still nothing.
A similar scene in Alabama, some even camping out overnight. Nearly 46 million jobless claims have been filed in the last 3 months, including 1.5 million last week. While claims are ticking down as states reopen, they've stayed in the millions for 13 weeks, a sign layoffs aren't stopping. Fed Chair Jerome Powell urging Congress to extend the $600 a week of extra federal unemployment aid provided by the CARES Act, which ends on July 31st.
Wild swings in the stock market also have Americans worried about their savings and retirement accounts.
There's no way to sort of even get the calculus on how big of a disruption this is, because it's really bringing the major parts of the U.S. economy to a virtual standstill.
These dire economic forecasts and dramatic moves in the stock market have led some to believe this crisis could be worse than the financial crisis that started in 2007, or maybe even than the Great Depression. Many economists say the challenge is to prevent the coronavirus health crisis from turning into a prolonged financial crisis.
The risk is that a health crisis, something that threw small businesses out of business overnight, something that threw workers, millions of workers out of work overnight, a health crisis could become a Great Depression if we don't deal with it now and provide that support to get through this period of time and have a recovery on the other side.
Businesses' abilities to stay solvent while they're closed is one factor that will affect the shape of the recovery. Another factor is how quickly Americans who are laid off will be able to get their jobs back, and if the relief from policymakers will be enough to get them through prolonged uncertainty. There's also the question of how quickly consumers are willing to go back to their normal activities even after the virus has been contained.
Americans have been struggling to pay for housing costs. In July 2020, an estimated 32% of Americans missed a rent or mortgage payment. That was up from 24% in April, 31% in May, and 30% in June. This trend is worrying experts that a wave of evictions may be coming once local, state, and federal moratoria on forced removals expire.
The eviction process itself is a barrier to maintaining personal and public health.
After Raquel Jones got laid off and then evicted last year, she struggled to find work in a new home. The pandemic made it even harder. The toughest part, she says, is trying to reassure her 8-year-old daughter.
I just tell her that everything is going to be all right soon.
With help from Housing NOLA, she's got temporary housing, but that ends next month. The CDC issued a new eviction moratorium. It wanted to prevent potentially millions of Americans being forced out of their homes and then spreading COVID-19 to wherever they can find shelter.
The CDC has done something extraordinary. They have made the absolute connection between housing and surviving this pandemic.
And Morris says many people will still be susceptible to evictions.
They have to prove that they lost income due to coronavirus, so this leaves out essential workers. This leaves out vulnerable populations like senior citizens who are trying to get by.
Morris says the housing crisis is not temporary, like many of the measures aimed at holding it off. She says political will and, of course, funding from every level of government is needed.
We can and we will rebuild our nation. We can and we will protect our nation from future pandemics. We can and we will emerge from this stronger, better, and a fairer nation. I've always believed we've been at our best when we've acted as one America. This crisis is an opportunity for us to be that nation again, to be the United States of America. Show up and vote. You will determine the outcome of this election. Vote, vote, vote. If you're able to vote early in your state, vote early. If you're able to vote in person, vote in person. Vote whatever way is the best way for you, because he cannot stop you from being able to determine the outcome of this election. And in terms of whether or not when the votes are counted, and they're all counted, that will be accepted. If I win, that will be accepted. If I lose, that'll be accepted. But by the way, if in fact he says he's not sure what he's going to accept, well, let me tell you something. It doesn't matter, because if we get the votes, it's going to be all over. He's going to go. He can't stay in power. It won't happen. It won't happen. So vote.
So there you heard it from one of the candidates who's running for our next leader of our country. So I echo his sentiments. And I say to you, you have the power. You don't have to feel hopeless or helpless. We've all felt the distress and the despair. It's time for us to stand up, speak up, use our voice, and vote. That's your powerful weapon. We appreciate you joining us for this very powerful episode, because we're only about a little more than 20 days out from the election. So it's very critical whether you vote by mail or whether you vote in person. Vote. And that's how I want to leave you. I thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week with another empowering episode.